morning. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Right now on Morning News Now, prayers for Damar, shock and sadness in the sports world and beyond. This morning, Buffalo Bills safety Damar Hamlin is at a hospital in critical condition after collapsing on the field during last night's game in Cincinnati. We have team coverage with the latest on his condition, plus reaction from teammates and friends, and the new questions about player safety in the NFL. Floor fight, a critical vote today on Capitol Hill. This morning, House Leader Kevin McCarthy struggling for support to lead the new Republican majority as some hardline conservatives threaten to vote against him. We'll bring you the very latest. Underwater, Californians caught off guard by a deadly deluge. This morning, recovery efforts underway following days of heavy rain, flooding, and landslides. And now a new storm system is threatening to cause even more damage. We're tracking the conditions. And return of the mask. This morning, Philadelphia students heading back to the classroom and back to COVID protocols as a new strain of the virus spreads. We'll be joined by the school district superintendent to talk about the renewed requirements. And, of course, a happy new year to all of you at home. Happy first day back after some holidays. We're back together. Happy to be.
Fulfilling all our resolutions right away, right?
Exactly, yeah, I know all of them. Dry January, working out, it's the whole thing, yeah. Maybe you're doing that at home, too.
We're going to do it in these 2 hours.
Together, yeah, exactly. We'll be here, actually, all day with you on News Now. We begin, though, with the latest on that scary Monday night football scene. This morning, Buffalo Bills safety Damar Hamlin is in critical condition after collapsing on the field, and we do want to warn you, some viewers may find the video disturbing.
Hamlin collapsed just moments after he made this tackle during the first quarter of last night's game against the Cincinnati Bengals. An ambulance arrived on the field, and Hamlin received CPR for nearly 10 minutes while players and coaches, clearly shaken, looked on. The Bills knelt to pray as the ambulance left the field. The game was initially suspended, eventually postponed, with both teams returning to their locker rooms. This morning, the Bills tweeted that Hamlin suffered a cardiac arrest and his heartbeat was restored on the field. Joining us now to talk about all this is USA Today NFL reporter Chris Bumbaka and sports medicine physician Dr. Jordan Metzel. Thank you both for joining us on this big story this morning. Chris, we want to start with you. What is the latest we're hearing about Damar Hamlin, and what are you hearing from the Bills and the NFL right now?
Right now, the main focus is on the health of Damar Hamlin, hoping that he will be okay, and hoping that his health and long-term health remains in clear hands. Unfortunately, we don't really know too much about that right now. As you mentioned, still in critical condition. The Bills updating us overnight that he did suffer a cardiac arrest and that his heartbeat was restored right there on the field, thanks to the life-saving measures taken by emergency first responders on the scene. And that's where we currently are.
Dr. Metzel, let's bring you in here and get into some of what's going on here medically. I mean, this morning the Bills, as Joe just mentioned, said that Damar Hamlin was sedated, listed in critical condition. He had suffered cardiac arrest. How can something like this happen? Walk us through, when you see that video, what exactly it was there that happens, especially since he's a seemingly healthy athlete, 24 years old, and he goes into cardiac arrest.
Yeah, great. Good morning and pleasure to join you. So we've talked several times this year about head injuries. And when you see an injury such as this one, that's where everybody's mind initially goes to. But NFL teams have medical care teams on the sideline that are made up of a whole about 20 medical personnel. They have orthopedic surgeons, they have medical doctors, they have emergency medicine doctors, they have neurosurgeons, they have all types of specialties, as well as athletic trainers and ambulances with defibrillators, all on the sideline of every NFL game, and every NFL team has that protocol in place. So in addition, every NFL team goes through scenarios where if somebody has a cardiac event, what do you do? What team do you activate? Who does what? And these are practiced and rehearsed at the beginning of every season and throughout the season. Because although these types of episodes are exceedingly rare in football, if it does happen, you need to know exactly what to do because seconds are of the utmost importance. In looking at this, and I was watching the game last night, as many were, and the way that he fell, I immediately thought that does not look like a head injury because generally the head injury cases that we've talked about this year are somebody kind of staggering and that type of situation. This was like an immediate drop. And so immediately you have to think that this is potentially a cardiac event. And so when somebody goes rushing out on the field, you know, to assess the situation, the first thing you do is kind of assess the ABCs, airway, breathing, circulation. What is the problem? And in this case, it was, I think, evident pretty quickly that this was something different. You could tell from the players' reaction, and from the medical side, you realize that this is something different and that this is a cardiac issue, and that becomes a different kind of emergency. So you need to secure an airway. It sounds like they took off his face mask. They made a wall of players around him. Yeah. This is a very different type of scenario than a head injury, and the way this is treated, the outcomes for this are all very, very different. And again, I don't want to speculate on the outcomes and the exact nature, but that's just the general framework of this cardiac type event, which is different than many of the other injuries that we see in all sports. And this kind of scenario is very rare in football. I just finished by saying that all these athletes are screened at the beginning of the year. They have really intensive medical care throughout the season and in a preseason physical. So, sometimes athletes in high school or college may have underlying cardiac issues. But it's quite rare in NFL level football.
Chris, because this was a different type of scenario, the NFL Executive Vice President of Football Operations said an emergency action plan went into effect right after he went down. What does that plan include? Have you ever seen anything like this before?
No, I haven't seen anything like this. I thought the broadcast was a little quick to say that they had never seen anything like an ambulance on the field before. That unfortunately does happen, but never to the degree that we see in this. We all knew, judging by the players' reaction, how serious it was, and that it wasn't just like a broken leg or anything like that. So what the emergency action plan is that, as Troy Vincent mentioned, it's rehearsed with all 32 teams each week. It's gone over again during the pregame meeting with coaches 90 minutes prior to kickoff. And it also involves the fact that all of the NFL markets have level 1 trauma centers associated with it, which is where Damar Hamlin went last night to the University of Cincinnati Medical Center. And it also includes airway management positions on site at each game in the event of an emergency like this.
Dr. Metzl, I know you just mentioned that you don't want to speculate, which of course is the right thing to do, but just from a medical perspective, knowing it's still very early, with an injury like this, you obviously have a lot of knowledge about kind of what happens next or what to watch for next. What is it that you're watching for next? What comes next for him in the recovery process?
So at present, it sounds like, and again, this is all speculative, but it sounds like he is in intensive care. He is likely quite sedated, and he is likely breathing with a ventilator tube to assist his breathing. And so what ends up happening now is then over the next day or so, that will slowly be, the sedative medication will slowly be lessened if his vital signs are stabilized, meaning his blood pressure, heart rate, et cetera. And then over time, you get a sense of how the heart is going to respond. Obviously, this is a very significant event, and we don't know the answer yet to what the cause was, meaning that if you've been following along, there's something called commotio cordis when a heart is hit just in between beats. Very, very rare in football. That's one possibility, but there are others as well. So it just really depends on what the injury, what the cardiac issue was as to why this happened. There's a whole long list of things that could be the cause for this. So I think when we know what that is, then we'll have a better idea of what it's going to look like. But the next day or so is going to be really important to get just an overall sense of what it's going to be.
Chris, clearly the priority right now is Hamlin's health and his injury. What does it mean, though, real quickly, that this game has been postponed?
That's one of the major questions that we still need answered, because obviously this is so secondary to what happened, and the NFL knows this, and they've been adamant about saying that that's really been the company line. But this game had seeding playoff implications, and that's just something that the league is going to have to figure out in the coming days as we learn more about Damar's health and really what the players want, because they went through traumatic events themselves last night, and they're going to have to deal with that going forward. Players from both teams, especially on the Buffalo Bills.
Such a good point there. All right. We'll continue to cover this story and bring you more throughout the morning. Chris Boombaka and Dr. Jordan Metzl, thank you both. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And now to Washington, where this morning the new Congress is set to hold its opening session. And in the House, one of the first orders of business will be voting for the next Speaker of the House. House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy is vying for that position, but he's faced an uphill battle to secure enough votes. Despite holding calls with Republican lawmakers and meetings to gain support, there are several Republicans who say McCarthy isn't right for the job.
He's part of the problem. He's not part of the solution. There's nothing about Kevin McCarthy that indicates that he will bring the change that's needed to Washington or that's needed to the Congress, or he'll bring the fight against the Biden-Schumer agenda and represent the interests of the voters who sent us to Washington to bring real change.
NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ali Vitale joins us now for more on all this. Ali, good morning. Happy New Year. Great to have you on with us. So first, just walk us through how this vote works.
Hey guys, good morning. You know, new year, but same drama that we ended the last year with, because Kevin McCarthy is still trying to cobble together the votes that he needs in order to become the next Speaker of the House. This is a man who, for the last several years, was visiting every district, recruiting candidates, raising big amounts of money for all of these candidates to run on. And now he's come back with the majority, although it's smaller than he thought it would be. And that's where it's going to be a problem, because how this will work is at noon today, they will begin the process of voting for the next Speaker of the House, but then it becomes a game of numbers and of strategy. The key number that you'll hear all of us talk about is 218, but that number could change based on how many people are voting yes, no, or present, or if there are any unforeseen absences, because all you need is the majority of the people who are on the floor of the House of Representatives. Right now, that number is 218, but it could change. And really, for McCarthy, the question is going to be, no one expects him to get the Speaker vote on the first ballot, but it's a question of how many ballots it'll take, how many ballots he's willing to stay in, how many ballots until he starts getting pressure to, if he can't start cobbling together the votes he needs, maybe drop out and make way for someone else.
So, Ali, as I mentioned, and of course, as you're kind of discussing here with these possible outcomes, there are still these Republican holdouts, despite these efforts from McCarthy to hold these meetings, have these phone calls, and he does face some unique challenges to get all the votes he needs. Walk us through why this has been so difficult for him.
Well, look, this is a moment where, again, the majority is smaller than Republicans thought it was going to be. And it means that in this kind of a Congress, every Republican member in this moment can sort of be their own Joe Manchin, to make an analogy across the chambers. Everyone has the power. And that's what you're seeing now, especially from the conservative wing of the party, trying to exact changes to the rules, to the way that committees are put together, and especially to the way this idea of vacating the chair, what it would take to oust a speaker. Conservatives have tried to make that threshold as low as 1. McCarthy has settled on making it that a handful of members could band together to vacate the chair, to oust the speaker. That's a big concession, but conservatives are still pushing for more. Some of them simply because they don't want to vote for McCarthy, others of them because they believe that this should go back to being a more procedurally slow place. And so when you talk about changing the rules, it's arcane, it gets boring, but it actually really impacts the way the House works, and that's what a lot of conservative members are trying to jockey for right now.
All right, Ali Vitale, we'll have a lot to watch for here. Thank you so much.
Now to the weather that's causing headaches across the country. Northern California is racing to recover from a deadly storm system that may have killed at least 3 people. The storm, known as an atmospheric river, brought severe flooding and landslides, making quick rescue missions nearly impossible. Now weather forecasts show another intense storm headed straight for the Golden State, putting everyone there on high alert. We're going to check in with Angie Lastman in just a moment, but first, this report from NBC News national correspondent Miguel Almaguer.
This is so bad, Mom.
The daring and dramatic rescues unfolded across California, a devastating deluge triggering a flurry of emergency calls as the suddenly stranded were plucked from submerged cars, flooded roads, and homes that took on water. This woman who tried to cross a swamp street thanking rescue teams who likely saved her life.
If it wasn't for you guys, we'd be in a lot of trouble. And don't do nothing stupid like I did.
After days of relentless rain, Northern California was pummeled with the brunt of a powerful atmospheric river, a band of moisture pouring onto the coast. In San Francisco, where the city nearly broke its single-day rainfall record, pedestrians floated down busy streets. Others used kayaks or surfboards. Statewide, as roads remain impassable, some are still under evacuation orders.
It was like Mother Nature came alive and declared war on Sacramento.
In Sacramento County, where there's been at least 1 death, authorities are bracing for more.
I've worked for the Cosumnes Fire Department, or previously the Elk Grove Fire Department, for 21 years. This is the most significant flooding I've seen in this area in those 21 years.
With 2 more atmospheric rivers expected to hammer the region later this week, mudslides, rock slides, and flooding remain a major concern, especially with the ground already saturated. back to you.
All right, Miguel, thank you.
And now, unfortunately, more storm systems are expected to impact that region today. Let's get a check on your Morning News Now weather.
Yeah, meteorologist Angie Lastman is here. Angie, good morning.
Good morning, guys. You heard Miguel say it. A lot more to come for folks on the West Coast. They just cannot catch a break. 15 million people are at risk here as we go through the next couple of days, really through the end of this upcoming, or this week. We'll see plenty more rain on already saturated grounds. We have a couple different systems that are going to work in. Here's the first one. This will happen through the day today. Places like Washington, Oregon, going to see some rain working in. But then this is just the whopping plentiful moisture that's going to work on shore. That atmospheric river is providing this, and it's just a highway for this moisture to hit the California coast. Really central to northern California is where we're going to look at the biggest issues. We could see the mudslides. We could, of course, see the roads washing out, and just heavy, excessive rain. Really dangerous conditions will unfold over some time here. This is going to be through this week. But the bullseye for that really good amount of moisture is going to be Wednesday. You can see anywhere from 3 to 5 inches in some places as we get through the next couple of days. Meanwhile, in parts of the south and extending into the Tennessee Valley, we have a tornado watch that's in effect for a lot of folks right now. This is going to be the dangerous situation that we watch unfold here as we get into the afternoon hours today, with the potential for that severe weather. The bullseye for the best chance of some tornadoes right now includes this orange shaded area. You see Montgomery, Mobile, New Orleans, Hattiesburg. But again, the yellow, which includes Birmingham, Jackson, as far north as Nashville, not out of the woods either. We could still see, yes, the tornadoes, but also those strong winds, the damaging hail. That's all on the table from this storm system that's working through. And not to mention, we have heavy rain possible as well, anywhere from 4 to 5 inches in some places that already have saturated grounds like Montgomery. Meanwhile, the northern half of that system, winter weather. We have 11 million people that are under these winter weather alerts, and this will make travel treacherous in some spots. We have up to a foot of snow that could be possible here as we get through Wednesday, and not to mention those gusty winds. So we know drifting snow is going to be problematic for visibility and on the roads. And we also have the potential for some freezing rain. And that means ice accumulation. Up to 1/4 of an inch is possible. That also means tree damages as well as power outages. That's all going to be on the table for folks in the upper Midwest and into the high plains through the day today. Temperature wise on the East Coast, boy, it looks like spring out there. Upper 60s in many places. We're going to take a run at some record highs today. Places like Philadelphia could see a record high, and there's 24 places that likely will break those record highs. So we've got it all going on across the country. It doesn't stop tomorrow either. It really kind of moderates out, guys. By the time we get into Friday and into Saturday, we'll get back to those more normal temperatures, but feeling quite warm out there. We've got the severe weather, we got the winter weather, we got rain in California. Yeah. We've got it all.
A little bit of
Happy New
everything.
Year.
My goodness.
Oh my gosh.
New year,
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah, we had our window open yesterday. I was like, this is so weird in January
in
here.
January.
Don't get used to it.
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks, Angie. At the Vatican today, tens of thousands of people are lining up at St. Peter's Basilica, where the body of Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI is lying in state ahead of Thursday's funeral. NBC News foreign correspondent Claudio Lavaga joins us now from Vatican City with the latest. Claudio, so good morning. About 65,000 people paid their respects yesterday. That number was higher than expected. What's the scene like there today?
Good morning, Joe and Savannah. Well, yes, the Vatican just told us that since this morning, 25,000 people have already paid their respect to the Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI, and that kind of reflects the long line of pilgrims or tourists and people in general that we've seen this morning again in St. Peter's Square, waiting for their chance to get inside St. Peter's Square. And that's only in the 3 hours of the morning. We still have a long way to go before the gates close. So we do expect the same numbers today, about 60 to 65,000 people. Joe?
We've been talking for days now about the complicated legacy that Pope Benedict leaves behind. Is that something that people who are coming to pay their respects are talking about at all?
Well, if you look at the numbers, the 65,000 yesterday and 25,000 today, well, that's twice as many as those that were expected, or we were told that were expected a few days ago. They were expecting about 30 to 35,000. And that shows you that people may have been more fond of Benedict XVI than some may have expected, especially considering that he was a controversial figure, that he only was Pope for 8 years, and that he's kind of been hidden away from the eyes of the world, as he said, for the past 10 years since he resigned in 2013. So yesterday, when we spoke to the people who were lining up, you may be surprised, but a lot of people were there to, of course, pay their respect to Benedict XVI. And if you didn't like him, I suppose you wouldn't wait for hours to do so. But others we're just waiting to get inside St. Peter's Square to admire the architecture, Joe.
Yeah, that's a good point. Most people there are probably great admirers of his. So let's look ahead here. What is the plan for the next 2 days before he is laid to rest on Thursday?
Well, tomorrow, again, is the last chance, the last day that the body will be lying in state inside St. Peter's Basilica, so the last opportunity for people to pay their respects. And then on Thursday morning at 9 o'clock in the morning here in Rome, Pope Francis will preside over the funeral mass in St. Peter's Square. And then after that, the body, the Pope Emeritus, will be buried in the Vatican crypt beneath St. Peter's Basilica. A little curiosity there. There was the same crypt where the last Pope who died, John Paul II in 2005, was buried before he was moved inside St. Peter's Basilica after he was beatified. Joe, Savannah?
All right, Claudio Lavanga. Claudio, thanks so much.
Now, this morning, there's growing anger in Russia over a Ukrainian attack that killed dozens of Russian soldiers in an occupied city in eastern Ukraine on New Year's Eve. Russia's defense ministry says 63 of its troops were killed in what could be the deadliest attack on Russian forces in months. NBC News foreign correspondent Matt Bradley joins us now from Kyiv with more on this. Matt, so the Russians are now acknowledging this attack. What's their assessment of what happened, and what's the reaction been like in Russia?
Not only acknowledging it, but they're actually admitting to some mistakes, which is very rare from the Russian side. They said that it's possible that the position of all of these Russian troops, and there could be hundreds of them who had been there, that was tipped off by the fact that a lot of them were using their personal cell phones to make calls, maybe back home, because it was New Year's, of course, which is a big holiday, both in Russia and in Ukraine. That's just a rookie mistake, and the kind of thing that generals and people on hand should have said not to do. There were other rumors that it's possible that there were locals who tipped off the Ukrainians to this position. Either way, there are people in Moscow, people in the Donbass region who are pro-Russian, people online who are just yelling for blood. They want to see this incident investigated, and they want to see the officers who were responsible charged.
How does this contrast with Ukraine's account of events? What are officials saying where you are in Kyiv?
Well, the Ukrainians put the number earlier in the day yesterday much, much, much higher. They said as many as 400 could have been killed. Now, of course, this is a major victory for Ukraine, no matter how you slice it. So for Ukrainians, they see this as the effectiveness of some of these weapons, the HIMARS system that was provided by the U.S., in using these surface-to-surface missiles in attacking the Russians. And, you know, one of the things that stands out here, and one of the things that the Ukrainians have been mentioning, these are newly mobilized troops. So Vladimir Putin, who has been engaging in round after round of mobilization, trying to get new men to fill his depleting ranks of soldiers, this just goes to show that they are squandering those new soldiers on the front lines.
And Matt, this attack comes amid this continued Russian drone and missile strikes targeting infrastructure in Ukraine. I know you've been speaking with the Ukrainian Air Force official about all of that. What did he have to say?
Yeah, and this is just another case of where U.S. and Western weapons have been devastatingly effective in not only attacking the Russians, as we saw with this incident on New Year's Day, but also in defending the Ukrainians and defending Ukrainian civilian infrastructure, which we see all around the city, against Russian attacks. And in the earlier case, the one in the eastern part of the country, it was the HIMARS system. Here, it's NASAMS systems and Gepard systems provided by the Germans. And, you know, the question now, considering how this has been a sustained attack, this is now the fifth day in a row, fifth or sixth day in a row, where we've seen attacks on civilian infrastructure far from the front lines. Can the Russians sustain this? And I asked this to the spokesman for the Ukrainian Air Force, and here's what he told me.
On the drones, it depends on how many Iran would be able to supply to Russia and how strong Western sanctions would be in reducing that supply. On the missiles, we see from military intelligence data that now Russians are using their untouched spares and that they are also running out of ballistic missiles. We've seen recently they are now firing and striking Ukraine with quite fresh missiles that were produced in September and in the summer.
Well, we just heard from President Volodymyr Zelensky last night saying that Ukrainians can expect another prolonged attack by these Iranian-made drones. So, hard to know. Joe, Savannah?
Matt Bradley, stay safe. Thank you so much.
Coming up, new developments in the murders of 4 Idaho college students.
Today, their suspected killer is set to appear before a judge as police prepare to release new information about their investigation. The latest next on Morning News Now.
Welcome back. The man accused of killing 4 University of Idaho students is expected to waive extradition in a Pennsylvania courtroom later today.
And police in Moscow, Idaho are also preparing to release new information about the case once suspect Brian Kohberger makes his first appearance in court. NBC News correspondent Gotti Schwartz has more on what we know about the suspect and how the victims' families are responding.
Without a fight over extradition, Brian Kohberger could be back here in Idaho by Tuesday night, possibly even Wednesday. Meanwhile, the families of the victims are preparing for what comes next.
28-year-old Brian Kohberger sits in a Pennsylvania jail hours away from an extradition hearing that could send him back to Idaho, where police say he killed 4 college students. Family members of the victims, Madison Mogan, Zana Kernodle, Ethan Chapin, and Kaylee Gonzalez, now bracing for the moment they may come face-to-face with the prime suspect in court. Tonight, we spoke with Kaylee's father, Steve.
Do you want to see this suspect with your own eyes?
Yes, definitely. I want this guy to get, whoever this person that was responsible for this, I want him to be sick of seeing us and sick of knowing that these people won't let it go.
Steve Gonzalez says the family had never heard of Kohberger until the arrest and says he's relieved to see the progress in the case, but that he's waiting to see all the evidence police have.
I feel a sense that we're on the right track to where I can say I can let my guard down a little bit, but we definitely still have a lot of work to do.
We're learning more about the suspect. Austin Morrison says Kohberger was a teaching assistant in a criminal justice class he took at Washington State.
Just rather quiet, very off to the side, standoffish. He sat in the class, didn't do a whole lot.
Kohberger's public defender saying his client was shocked by his arrest and will not fight extradition to Idaho.
He believes he will be exonerated.
He says Kohberger traveled by car from Washington to Pennsylvania with his father, who said his son was acting normally. Police seizing a white Hyundai Elantra at Kohberger's parents' home in Pennsylvania, the same model they say was seen near the crime scene around the time of the attack. 2 law enforcement sources familiar with the investigation tell NBC News that DNA evidence played a role in leading investigators to the suspect. Meanwhile, Steve Gonzalez is still reeling from the loss of his 21-year-old daughter.
Our next mission is really to find justice and make sure that we have a closing chapter that meets the expectations of all the families.
And authorities say that once he is brought back here to Idaho to face an Idaho judge, they will be able to, by law, unseal the probable cause statement, which will detail a lot more of the evidence that they seized and are using against him, including potential DNA. Back to you.
All right, Gotti, thank you so much.
International headlines now. Emergency services are still working to help rescue and house people in the Philippines after devastating floods.
NBC News foreign correspondent Raf Sanchez joins us now with the details. Hey, Raf, good morning.
Hey, Savannah. Hey, Joe. Good morning. That's right. The death toll from that Christmas flooding in the Philippines has now reached at least 51, with thousands of families displaced. Authorities say they are still searching for another 19 people who are missing. The water is largely subsided at this point, but there is still the massive task of finding shelter for people who lost their homes. In Australia, authorities are trying to figure out how 2 helicopters collided at a theme park. One chopper was able to make an emergency landing, but the second crashed into the water. 4 people were killed when that helicopter went down, including the pilot, a married British couple, and an Australian woman. And finally, in Cuba, women are punching their way through a major gender barrier. Authorities on the island have finally agreed to allow women to compete in boxing. Cuba has a long boxing tradition, but women were barred from taking part in the sport. Now they are hoping to compete in the 2024 Olympics in Paris. And guys, female boxers say they hope this will change not only the sport, but some of the machismo attitudes in Cuban society. Guys.
All right. That'd be cool to see. Yeah, definitely. All right, Raf, thanks so much.
Thanks, Raf. And coming up on Morning News Now, back to masks. This morning, Philadelphia students returning to new rules after the holiday break. We'll talk to the school district superintendent about the new COVID protocols now in place.
And the new study revealing a tragic consequence of controversial abortion restrictions. We'll be right back.
We're back with details about COVID protocols put in place for Philadelphia's school district. All students and staff will be required to wear masks for at least 2 weeks when inside school buildings.
The policy goes into effect today as thousands return from holiday break and as a new COVID variant continues to take hold. So let's bring in the superintendent of the school district of Philadelphia, Tony Watlington Sr., for more on this. Superintendent, thank you so much for joining us to talk about this. I mean, you actually made this announcement back on December 14th. Since then, the COVID situation has grown even more serious, which is not surprising considering the holidays and all the time folks spent together. But what brought you to this decision in the first place? And do you think it could even go beyond 2 weeks?
Well, first of all, good morning, Savannah and Joe. Thank you for allowing me to be with you this morning. Yes, we made this decision some time ago because we had an increase in COVID cases after Thanksgiving, and we expect something similar to happen, excuse me, after the winter break, which was a longer break. We know that the number of cases increased. We know that the percent positive rate and hospitalizations have increased, although the absolute number of cases have remained fairly steady. So there may be some underreporting. We don't know, but we do know that the Philadelphia Department of Public Health supports a very strong recommendation and our decision to mask for 10 days. And we don't think we'll do it more than 10 days. We think 10 days will be appropriate and adequate, but we'll continue to follow the numbers and the science.
Given that you're sort of reacting to holidays, as Joe mentioned, when people are gathering together, of course, the winter season also usually makes things worse. And now we've got this new variant, XBB. Are there other preventative measures that Philadelphia's school district is thinking of taking?
Absolutely. I think I'm glad you mentioned that because it's not just about wearing a form-fitting mask. It's also important that when students or staff are sick, that they stay home, that we cover our coughs, that we continue to clean and appropriately disinfect areas, that we wash our hands, and take other mitigation steps to include getting tested. And we've made COVID tests available across the school district free of charge to our families and to our staff.
When mask mandates vanished across much of the country, one of the big fears is once you take those mandates away, it's going to be really, really hard to bring them back. So I'm guessing you might have some parents, maybe even some students who are hesitant to put the masks back on for these next 2 weeks. What's your message to them?
Well, Savannah and Joe, let me first say, as superintendent, I've got my mask here today, too. My good form-fitting KN95 mask. It would be my personal preference not to have to wear this. However, we all have some responsibility to ensure that we have good health, not just in the city, but that we also have good attendance over the long term, over the rest of the school year for our students and staff. So I would say that here in Philadelphia, where we're working really hard to become the fastest improving large urban school district in the country, on the one hand, we know we need our kids in school if we're going to get the dropout rate down and significantly improve our graduation rate and academic achievement. The other side of that nickel is we want to just simply make sure our students and staff are safe. And so we think that with a strong recommendation from the Philadelphia Department of Public Health, we did not enter into this decision lightly, and we think we're making the right decision, notwithstanding what other school districts across the country may or may not be doing.
And
we think this is the right decision for Philadelphia.
And Superintendent, I understand that as of now, anyway, this is sort of the short-term plan, these 10 school days of this masking. But is there any concern with just students' ability to learn with those masks on? I know that was another thing we heard a lot from parents, from teachers, was that it was difficult for students to be keeping those on in the classroom. How do you handle that in your school district?
We think that certainly it's not the most desired state over the long term, but we're using some common sense measures, and we've done this before, so we think we're going to make it through these 10 days, and we don't think that learning will stop or that students will be inherently prohibited from learning. Although we certainly hope that we are all doing our part in the city to get tested, to stay home when we're sick, to wash our hands and do those other mitigation strategies so that we can limit this masking experience to 10 days.
All right. Superintendent Tony Watlington Sr., thanks so much for joining us this morning. Best of luck to your school district.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thanks, you too. And now it's time for our weekly mental health check-in. We begin with new research on the impact of abortion restrictions on young adults, suggesting they may have increased suicides.
Plus, we do have some tips on how to handle New Year's stress.
Let's bring in Dr. Soumya Dave for more on these headlines. She's a psychiatrist and the author of What a Happy Family. Doctor, always great to have you on with us. So let's start with this concerning study that we've mentioned here. It was conducted by the University of Pennsylvania, and it found abortion restrictions may have played a role in some suicides among women ages 20 to 34, and this dates back to 1974. Walk us through your takeaways here. Why are abortion restrictions impacting younger women more? Just kind of remind us of the toll that those denied services can have on a patient.
Sure. So what this study found is that when those restrictions were enforced during that time period, there was also an increase in suicide rates by 6% among young women. And so what we do know is that when people have barriers to healthcare, they have more stress, they have more anxiety, and those things lead to poorer mental health. Now, this is something that is still being researched, and we're still learning more and more about this. But I think we keep seeing a call over and over again for more mental health support across the board.
Before we move on to our next question, we do just want to say if you or anyone you know is struggling, you can call or text the Suicide and Crisis Hotline, which is 988, as you see on your screen there.
So we all know the holidays can be stressful. The thought of a new year can also actually lead to anxiety for many. So help us understand, why do people experience anxiety at this time during the new year, and what can we do to try and ease some of those symptoms?
The new year can bring up a lot, right? So many people might feel a sense of pressure to either start a new habit, make a big change, and at the same time, many people are also going through that post-holiday slump, right? The festivities and celebrations have stopped. And so I really recommend for people to acknowledge however they're feeling, make space for structure and self-care every single day. If you want to make goals, make them specific and realistic. If you don't, though, it's fine, because we know that growth and change are not linear. So it's okay if your journey is not going exactly with the calendars. We can take that pressure off of ourselves.
Oh, that's a great way to think about it. Important reminder there. Also, another thing we want to ask you about. All right, so everybody knows, the saying, like, with age comes wisdom. As you get older, you gain some of that. Well, a new study suggests that wisdom might also include how we handle stress. Researchers found that older people are better equipped to deal with stressful situations in their lives compared to people specifically in their 20s. What can you tell us about this study and how younger generations can learn, maybe just, through conversation, through what, to lower their stress levels?
Now, this was so interesting because younger people are going through many transitions, right? They're often occupying many roles in their personal and professional lives. They're going through many changes. And so those are all opportunities for stress. Now, older people still may have a lot of stress, but as you said, it's about how we handle that stress. So we do know that our mental well-being is not only about whether we have stress, but also about how we respond to it. So I recommend for everyone, no matter what their age is to be aware of what your stressors are, have plans to combat those stressors. So prioritize sleep, prioritize self-care, prioritize those strong social connections, and also give yourself some grace, because we're all operating within systems, and we do need systemic change in order for people to feel like they can get that support they need for stress management every day.
Always give ourselves grace.
Just going to say
always
the same thing. Yes, so important. Doctor, as always, thank you so much. Happy New Year. Great to have you on with us.
Happy New Year.
Coming up, he was once known as the king of crypto. Now he's heading to court.
After the break, what NBC News has learned about a hearing today for FTX founder Sam Bankman-Fried. This is Morning News Now.
Welcome back. FTX founder Sam Bankman-Fried is scheduled to be arraigned later today in U.S. District Court in Manhattan, and NBC News has learned he is expected to plead not guilty.
The former CEO is facing a series of federal charges, including wire fraud and money laundering. Prosecutors believe he conspired to mislead lenders about the state of his company. Now, Bankman-Fried was released on a $250 million bond last week.
NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalos is here with more on all this. Good morning. So what can we expect from Bankman-Fried's legal team today? Clearly not a surprise that he's going to plead not guilty, right?
It's almost a certainty at this kind of initial appearance arraignment. I'm not entirely sure the court could even handle a guilty plea procedurally. So typically what the defendant does is plead not guilty, enter that plea, and then if he wants to change his plea down the line, you just get a change of plea hearing. Everyone rushes in and the defendant can plead guilty. But really, it's just a pro forma thing today. He pleads not guilty. More important, normally you might discuss issues of bail, some other pretrial type issues, and that's about it at the arraignment.
So 2 former FTX associates have actually already pleaded guilty, and they're now cooperating with federal prosecutors in this case. What kind of information would prosecutors be looking to get from them, and how does that impact what's going on here with Bankman-Fried?
This is a huge ruh-roh for Sam Bankman-Fried because these are now cooperating witnesses. In other words, and as a defense attorney, I have a biased view of cooperating witnesses, but these are people who are making a deal with the government to reduce their criminal exposure and in return give the government what it wants. Now, the concern defense attorneys like me have is that there's a tremendous incentive to exaggerate, to put some spin on it, to make them look a little more innocent and give the government what it wants, which is Sam Bankman-Fried on a dinner plate.
Now, Bankman-Fried, prosecutors allege that it was his actions that really led and contributed to the downfall of the company, and that left investors unable to access their funds. So those investors, I mean, do we expect them to try and file a civil suit to maybe try and get anything from Bankman-Fried in civil court?
They already have. There's a host of civil cases filed against SBF and other related defendants, including, officers of the company. So this is a certainty. The reality is, will they be able to claw back any of these assets? Not likely. I mean, just take a look at all the lawsuits. Those are all different plaintiffs trying to feast at one very diminishing piece of the pie. I'm out of metaphors.
I was just going to say, lots of food this morning. Dinner plates and pies.
Small, yeah.
Danny, thank you so much,
Thank you.
as always. Let's stay on some financial headlines. A lawsuit is delaying a new law in California aimed at improving conditions for restaurant workers.
CNBC's Pippa Stevens joins us with that and other money news. Pippa, good morning.
Good morning. Well, a federal judge has temporarily blocked California from implementing a sweeping law aimed at raising wages and improving conditions for fast food workers. The state comes after restaurant industry groups filed a lawsuit to block the measure from taking effect until voters in the state have their say in the next election in 2024. The law would create a council with the power to set wages and hours for fast food chains with at least 100 locations nationwide. Critics say it could push menu prices higher and force some businesses to close or cut jobs. And Tesla produced a record number of vehicles in the fourth quarter, but still missed Wall Street's forecasts. The company continues to face supply chain issues and slowing demand for its electric vehicles. Delivering fewer cars than it makes has been rare for Tesla. It's also coming up against weaker demand in China and stiff competition from the likes of Ford, GM, and startups such as Rivian and Lucid. And Apple is telling several suppliers to make fewer parts for AirPods, the Apple Watch, and MacBooks for the first quarter of this year due to weaker demand. Japan's Nikkei reporting one manufacturer says the supply chain in China is still trying to adapt to the government scrapping its zeroed COVID policy last month, which has led to a shortage of workers because of a surge in COVID cases. Apple makes nearly all iPhones in China. Guys, back to you.
All right.
Thank you, Pippa.
Thanks, Pippa.
Coming up on Morning News Now, a lot of cheers, but no beers.
Football stadiums across the country are creating special sections for sober fans. When we come back, we'll take you to the stands for more on the movement. Stay with us.
Welcome back. The golf world had a Masters mix-up. 3-time PGA Golf Tournament winner Scott Stallings waited for days for his invitation to the Masters with no luck, until he got an unexpected message on Instagram. It turns out a different Scott Stallings, a realtor in Atlanta with very little golf experience, had received an invite to play at the prestigious tournament. At first, Scott, the golfer, thought it was a hoax, but Scott, the realtor, sent pictures with a note that said, "I'm really not kidding, I promise." So with a quick trip to the post office, the issue was resolved. And get this, turns out their wives have the same first name, too. I think the best way to end all of this is that the realtor shows up and tees off with the actual golfer, and they play like a round together.
Their wives have the same name. That is just bizarre.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, thanks, Joe.
Yep.
All right, all week, NBC News is looking at alcohol in our series Drinking in America. And for NFL fans, having a beer at a game can be part of the experience, but that can be difficult for people who want to stay sober. Now, family-friendly and alcohol-free sections are rolling out at stadiums across the country. Here's NBC News correspondent Sam Brock.
About half the teams in the NFL have created some sort of service for families or individuals who want to enjoy the game day experience without alcohol. We're in Miami right now. The Dolphins have had that concept here for a couple of decades now. But this idea of a sober support network helping people on the ground during the game, that is novel. It's only been in place for about 3 years at Lambeau Field and only at Lambeau, and it has completely changed the experience for some fans and their supporters. The Green Bay Packers Lambeau Field wouldn't be Lambeau
I love my Green Bay Packers
without the tailgating, the brats, and the beer.
It's a brewski. Brewskis for the Packers. Go Pack!
Now, the oldest franchise in the NFL is the first to try something groundbreaking.
You want a sticker? Sure.
Section Yellow, a first-of-its-kind sobriety station offering support and community for fans who don't drink.
Section Yellow is not anything about abolishing or saying no to drinking. We just want to give a safe area for people that are sober.
But this has expanded beyond what your expectations were?
Immensely.
The Detroit Motown Miracle.
Section Yellow was co-founded by recovering alcoholic John Ploggeman, a lifetime Packers fan with the shrine to match. He'd seen Fish fans embrace a similar sober supportive concept at concerts and helped to export the idea to Green Bay. For newcomers, Section Yellow offers information. For members of the sober community, it offers friendship. Here's a snapshot into how it's going. Witness the joy of Ruth Farrow and Lexi Sokol, huge Packers fans. The two met a couple of hours before kickoff. After Ruth, who stopped drinking in 2019, posted on the Section Yellow Facebook page, "I would love to go to the game tomorrow night. I'm sober and looking for a sober game buddy, preferably a gal." Lexi then responded, "I'd totally go with you."
Section Yellow provides that community. We can come together and conquer stuff and meet strangers and go to Packer games.
I get asked all the time, how do you have fun if you can't drink? Well, she knows exactly how to have fun when we don't drink, and we've been having a complete blast since we got here.
The blast, courtesy of Ploggeman and Section Yellow co-founder Thomas Doofman, who's also a certified counselor.
We are in a stadium that holds up to 82,000 people, and probably 80,000 of them are consuming some beverage that's got alcohol, so we want them to know they aren't alone.
In the eyes of many, professional football and alcohol go hand in hand. For decades, beer commercials have focused on football fans. But increasingly, NFL teams are recognizing not all spectators imbibe. 14 teams have now either established alcohol-free seating sections in stadiums, or in the case of the Packers, a designated support station for fans who don't drink.
We're proud that we are able to kind of start this initiative off, and hoping that other teams will carry it on.
The NFL says it wishes to be inclusive and supportive of all fans.
We're about unifying and bringing people together, and I think Section Yellow is an extremely positive example of that.
John and Section Yellow followers hope that Section Yellow will soon be replicated on a larger scale, up to and including the Super Bowl.
Do you want to see this in more NFL stadiums around the country?
Oh, absolutely. I think Section Yellow is probably one of the best things that happened for this environment.
Taking the ball and running with it for sober fans everywhere. What's also notable here is where this is happening. The three communities surrounding Green Bay happen to rank 1, 2, and 3, not just in the state of Wisconsin, but in the country for binge drinking. Also, the NFL says it has had success sharing best practices before. Another example would be sensory sections for people on the autism spectrum that started in a couple of stadiums and ultimately expanded to the Super Bowl. You can see a similar evolution taking place, perhaps here with Section Yellow.
All right, Sam Brock, thank you so much. Super interesting.
Yeah, that does it for this hour of Morning News Now.
But the news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.